Sponsored by Squarespace. There's a vision we share, and the older the game gets, the more we want it. It's zones recrafted with modern tools. Starting zones that aren't stuck 2 decades in the past. Capital cities that live up to Silvermoon's promise. Stormwind and Orgrimmar properly revamped. In short, many of us want a world revamp. And here's the big news. Blizzard are on board. They're no longer telling us how difficult it would be to revamp Azeroth, rather, they're now telling us how excited they are to do it. Now this comes from recent developer interviews. Essentially, reception to Silvermoon has been overwhelmingly positive. They're really happy with Northrend, which is being revamped in The Last Titan, and that means they're now asking themselves what comes next. What's on their mind? Well, zones like Stone Talon, Durotar, and starting zones have all been mentioned. So, today, let me show you Blizzard's all-new revamp philosophy and how it points to foundations already being laid. With so many people playing WoW, it can be hard to stand out, hard to get the perfect mog. It's a bit like that online. Everyone's online, but the question is, do you look pro or do you look forgettable? And today's sponsor, Squarespace, has been shipping serious upgrades to help you in that, and they're worth paying attention to. Here is Finish Layer. It's the kind of new headline feature. It gives you professional grade animation, scroll effects, and transforms. It's the sort of polish that used to require hiring a developer, and it turns a standard site into something that is immersive, and it's all built into their editor. And of course, that's all on top of their blueprint system that walks you through building your own custom template, asking you what pages you need, suggesting fonts that work together, and a color palette that ties it all together. So you get no blank canvas paralysis, you get guided decisions that are based on their 20 years of design experience. And while you probably know about all their e-commerce stuff, you can actually sell things in person with Squarespace, be it merch, services, whatever. It all works now with tap to pay on iPhone, so you can just accept contactless payments with just your iPhone. No card reader, no extra hardware. And that alone makes Squarespace a hell of a lot more than just a website builder. So you can build your site for free at squarespace.com/BellularGaming. And when you're ready to set it live, use code BellularGaming and that'll get you 10% off your first purchase of a site or domain. The world revamp topic. It conjures up emotions so big in the community that we've had a hair trigger for data mined old world assets, but this time it's far more real. In an interview with Game Informer, Blizzard devs talked about the success of rebuilding Quel'Thalas and gave us some insight into the Northrend revamp. Basically, they're incredibly happy with player feedback and what they're seeing internally. So happy that it's giving them a kind of confidence about the future. Associate Game Director Paul Cubitt basically couldn't contain his excitement. Blizzard have realized that players love going back to old locations, and more importantly, that is something that they can actually build entire expansions around. Don't know about you, but I think I've had enough random island expansions, at least for now. He uses Wyrmrest Temple as an example. It's an iconic place, and other than Death Knights killing dragon whelps, we haven't caught up with it in-game since Cataclysm's Dragon Soul. That's something he says he's excited to revisit in The Last Titan. But then the excitement really hits him. What about Elwyn and Durotar? What about random places out in the wild like Stone Talon Mountain? Did you know there are black dragons under that mountain? That's something we learned in Warcraft 3. There's a whole cave system under Stone Talon where Thrall and Jaina meet Medivh, yet it is nowhere to be found in-game. But that's the sort of story that Paul wants to go back and tell. And that's massive, not just because of the story potential, but because this is a developer, a very important, high-title developer, looking at it seriously and talking about a real zone and real narrative stuff in an actual interview with the press. And that makes us think, what about Desolus, Ashenvale, the Barrens? Well, he's not the only person to catch revamp fever. It seems it has rather spread through Blizzard HQ. There's another interview. It was done with PC Gamer, and in it, visual development manager Gabriel Gonzalez joined Cubitt to talk about Silvermoon. Now, he's the person who creates the color, the texture, the feel of his zone. That's the team that he's a part of. Basically, the person with the broad scope to direct different departments towards a singular visual identity. So he'll be at the forefront of any revamp, and it's clear that he's quite psyched. Revamping Silvermoon was, to him, scary. Gonzalez talked about the zone that already existed being smoke and mirrors, right? There's what you can see from the ground, but if you were to move your camera up, walking around those zones today, you would see blank, unbuilt locations, cardboard cutouts. I mean, it never got the flying mount treatment. That's basically why. But Midnight Silvermoon is proof that that can work. And trust me, Midnight Silvermoon is absolutely fantastic. And when the discussion got to Silvermoon being the proof that they needed that it can actually work, well, that's when Paul Cubitt takes a shot. Because sure, fear is a factor, but the opportunity is huge. Essentially, they were anxious to see, and maybe are still a bit anxious to see, how people respond to Silvermoon, because if it works, it opens up storytelling opportunities across the entire world. Now, we've seen a few examples so far, but, and this is the key part, they specifically want to tackle a Stormwind and Orgrimmar rebuild. We have that in writing from an interview. Now, you may say a city revamp and a world revamp are different things. You may think about past interviews with, say, Ian Hazzikostas talking about how, yeah, it would be really cool, but, it would be hard. Here's where it's kind of cool, because Ian is talking about it, and he's talking about it in a bit of a different way. Ian Hazzikostas is WoW's game director, and at times he can be difficult to pin down on an issue. You know, maybe could seem willing to keep any promise open-ended enough to, have wiggle room on. Maybe you could say that stuff he's perfected from his days as a lawyer. Maybe it's that he's stubborn, or maybe it's because he knows it's really goddamn dangerous to go out in an interview and write a whole bunch of checks when you don't know you can cash them. Personally, I lean towards the latter being the example. But it also means that whenever he starts to sound more specific, it's kind of worth taking note. As an example, things like dropping the game's faction divide. He admitted that, quote, "They probably reached the tipping point a while ago, but in a game like this, we're stubborn and traditionalists, and it's scary to say, let's uproot this foundational pillar of what the game has been for over a decade. But it's time." That was him talking about whenever they loosened up some of the faction restrictions. So he knows they can be a bit stubborn internally, but he also knows when to pivot. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the world revamp discussion. Let's bring this back a few years and do a comparison. It truly is illuminating. Ian has been fielding revamp questions almost as long as he's been director of the game. Post Battle for Azeroth, there was light speculation about a revamp, but the rumor mill quickly turned to Shadowlands. That's an expansion that, of course, introduced a 5-year time skip to the setting. Why? Well, Steve Denuser told us it was to give Azeroth time to breathe and let some characters grow up. But then they told us that major events like reclaiming Gilneas wouldn't happen off-screen during a time skip, that things of that magnitude would happen in-game. That naturally reignited the revamp speculation. I mean, surely a reclaimed Gilneas could only be pulled off in a full revamp, which, if you consider the liberation of Gilneas that we actually got, I suppose is still true and on the cards. But then speculation went into overdrive whenever Ian was asked about the time skip. He said that we'd just have to see what Azeroth looked like when we got back. I mean, that's a little bit of revamp bait, isn't it? Well, it pretty much was bait, because we came out of the time skip, not much had changed, and then we went to the Dragon Isles. That's how the discussion and the comms had been. But now it's time to see Ian, well, flipping the script. Roughly midway through Dragonflight, Ian's tone changed. We didn't know it then, but of course World Soul Saga was already in pre-production, and the Quel'Thalas rebuild was likely in its earlier foundational stages. That early success seems to be what shifted him, because in a 2023 GameSpot interview, he told us he was definitely open to a revamp at some point. That, quote, "It is a shortcoming. If you take a step back and think about World of Warcraft as an ongoing living world, that we've painted ourselves into a corner, where we have these iconic locations, but can't use them because they've already been used." I remember reading that interview for the first time, and my reaction was just, yeah, Ian, that is the biggest truth that has ever been true. It's absolutely a tension and almost a tragedy of this game. All the parts of it that we're nostalgic about, that we remember from our childhoods, just can't be touched in a meaningful enough way to matter, because that's what the zone is. You can't do anything without revamping it. But that was 2023. Here's the cool bit. By 2025, Ian would go a lot further in his interviews, telling us, quote, "A lot of time has passed, a lot of changes happened, and there are new stories to tell, and I think something that we've thought a lot about on the WoW front is if we're actually doing ourselves and our story an injustice if we can't tell new stories in those places. So you can see it all, painted into a corner, and then that it's an injustice to just leave it the way it is. And now, in 2026, Ian has said this, quote, "I think it's essential when building a living world to tell new stories in familiar places." And that's the culmination. From guiding people away from the idea and a lot of hedging in the past, to outright acknowledging the corner they had painted themselves into, to calling it an injustice, and finally, now, to calling it essential. That is 4 years of unmistakable shifting on the issue. And as we've seen that shift, we've seen other developers talk about world revamp stuff in a way that feels far more tangible. As an example, the Stone Talon Mountain stuff from earlier. Now, in the 2026 interview, Ian continues to talk about striking a balance between nostalgia and freshness, the importance of borders and contiguous spaces, and that players shouldn't walk 200 yards and suddenly be stuck with 20-year-old assets. It would be easy to hand-wave that away as just being philosophy, but when we take what's been said by Ian, by Kubit, by Gonzalez, I think it's clear that the Blizzard team has a direction on this issue. We've also seen them hype up that this BlizzCon is going to be talking about the next 20 years of the franchise. I'm sure that's going to mean non-World of Warcraft things, but on the World of Warcraft front, I wouldn't be surprised if that's when they talk about some form of revamp happening. And the good news is Midnight has proved it's possible, and possible at a high level of quality, because say what we may about a few plot points or character things, you see the actual world? It is absolutely incredible. Silvermoon is incredible. Eversong is incredible. They've absolutely nailed the brief. They've done a good enough job that I'm actually confident in their ability to deliver a revamped Northrend in The Last Titan. And that does mean a lot to me personally. Northrend is my favorite part of World of Warcraft. If that is a success, you can guarantee Blizzard will turn their eyes to the rest of the world. And now that means we have to think, how are they actually going to do it? A full world revamp would be a truly titanic endeavor. Doing Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor all at once would be a lot. Maybe they'll do one per expansion. Maybe another saga where Azeroth is slowly revamped over several expansions, with each expansion putting big focus on one region of the world. Maybe it will be that. There's no way of us knowing exactly right now. But Blizzard just released player housing, and with it, the community wish list has lost another long-term pain point. A lot of people wanted player housing, world revamp. I mean, at this stage, I think it's playable ogres and a tinker class left from the classic player wish list? That, of course, and the world revamp. So they may take a slow, pragmatic approach to this stuff, but the resources and the talent are there to pull it off. And insofar as the sorts of things that are production friendly, that scale well with a larger art department, stuff like revamping zones actually does fit the resources of a big company like Blizzard. And while it's always been true, a company like Blizzard could do that, it's obvious that they were afraid to, that they were a little bit stubborn about that fear. From these interviews, and from examining how Ian is talking about it, across 4 or 5 years, I think it's clear that they now have the confidence and they have the resources to do a revamp. And more than that, they have ample practice. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear about this in September this year with The Last Titan. But to get to The Last Titan, we're going to be doing Midnight first. And if you're wondering, who the hell is this guy with his new haircut? What's Arator? What's going on with him? Well, watch this video next, because you'll get everything you need to know and the full journey of him as a character. And honestly, actually, I think it's quite a banger. So yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. See you later.